Hi, everybody, and welcome back to The Purpose Cooker. I'm Lexi.
And I'm Erica.
And today we want to talk about impatiently patient and making the right choices. Mm-hmm. Yes, you heard it right. Impatiently patient. What does that even mean? How many of us have been in those seasons or the time where we're like, you know, I'm trying to be patient, but I'm impatient about being patient. I know. Mm-hmm. I know for me, I have been in that season. I'm in that season. Like I'm like up and down with those seasons. And we just wanted to talk about like, what do you do? What does the Bible say? How do you deal with that? And how do you like overcome those feelings, the anxiousness of that? Mm-hmm. And it kind of goes back to, I think, cuffing season when we were talking about, I don't know if it was cuffing season. One of our videos we were talking about being...
We'll link it in here somewhere.
Yes, we will. But being content in your season, and it sounds great to try and be content in your season, but also what are the steps or what do you do when you're trying really hard to be content and you know or you have this idea of where you want to be? Like, how do you be patient when you're trying to be content in that season,
right?
Until your promises come to pass? So we wanted to talk about that today. And what do you do? So you're waiting for that promotion. You're waiting for the new job, the new car, the husband, the wife. And you believe that it's going to happen. God has told you that it's going to happen. Right. Even further than that, like you've gotten a vision of it, whatever the case is. But it's just not your time. What do you do in that season? So I wanted to talk to you guys about that. And the main thing is I've learned to remove my feelings. Sometimes feelings can really like overtake you and you start to do things that you probably wouldn't have done before. But remove your feelings from the situation and look at it from a bigger scope. Look at it from a satellite view or an aerial view, from God's view, and say, okay, why don't I have this right now? What is it that God's doing to either build my character, or what is he trying to bring together? And I think about this verse or verses in Isaiah where God told Isaiah to go and to not be afraid, to have faith in him and to take his sons with him, because he was fearful of his enemies that were going to invade them and take them over. And this is in Isaiah chapter 7. Isaiah was fearful of his enemies that were going to overtake him. But through speaking with God, God gave him the revelation, and he told him, he was like, hey, look, this is what's going to happen. They're not going to overtake you. Have faith in me. And this is actually what's going to happen in 65 years. And so when God said that to Isaiah, he understood, he believed, he had faith. And that's all he needed to know. So the reason why I brought this up is because I know with myself, sometimes like even when God has given me a vision of where he's going to take me, I'm still impatient. But what he's doing in that moment, he's building my character, or sometimes like even if it's like a job promotion or your future spouse, whatever the case is, you may feel like you're ready. But what if that position, he's moving certain things for that position for you to step into that role? What if he needed to get someone else out of that role, or even create that role for you to walk into? Yeah. And he can't do that with that person in it. He can't do that with that job not even being there. There's stuff that God sees that we don't see. So it's very important that we're just patient in our season, and we speak to God. We bring our frustrations and anxiety, whatever it is about that season that we're waiting, we bring it to God so that he can give us insight about just about where he's taking us and what we need to do and making the right decisions.
I think, when I heard this story, as Lexi, God gave her these verses and she, went over them with me. And the first thing that came to mind was, when I look at this story, I think of the fact that God told Isaiah something that was going to take place 65 years later. Mm-hmm. And mind you, this whole time, Isaiah is fearful, right? He is under attack. And so he's saying, He's asking God, like, what am I supposed to do? And God's telling him, it won't be for 65 years, but just know they're not going to overtake you.
Right.
And so the whole time, but Isaiah's like, they are coming after me. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes, depends on how God gives you, how he speaks to you and what he tells you as far as the plans he has for you. Sometimes he gives you snippets. He may give you just the next week, the next month, mm-hmm. within the year. Sometimes he gives you the end of the road, what it's going to look like, and he does that for me too. But then you don't know the steps that it's going to, that it'll take to get there. But the key component to all of this is having faith mm-hmm. in him keeping his promises, right? That he's a promise keeper, and remembering those attributes of who God is, that he does keep his promises, mm-hmm. that what he says he means and he'll do it. And that's exactly what I grasped from that small little excerpt mm-hmm. from Isaiah, is just that this is something that was going to happen 65 years later. But in the midst of that, he is still under attack. He is still fearful. And so that's why it's important that in the waiting seasons, we are able to understand what, like Lexi was saying, what does God want for me to learn in this season? Like, what is the most important, what is the key thing that he wants for me to understand? Sometimes we can feel like it's taking longer than we expected. We don't know why it's taking so long, mm-hmm. right? And so when it's taking a long time, we're in that waiting season. I think God is waiting to see what kind of choices we make. Mm-hmm. Because that's a test, and that's a sign of the character building. That's a sign to say, okay, they're ready. Mm-hmm. Because he is not going to bring us into the next season until he has prepared us in the current season that we're in. So it begins with the choices. Yeah. So that's why the title of this is, impatiently patient in the choices that we make, because you got to make the right choices in order to be ready to go into the next season. Right. So, whether that's knowing, I'm not going to say yes to hanging out with these people because that's going to send me into a space that I'm not really prepared to be in it right now in this season. I can't handle that. Or it's creating an environment where you are allowing the Holy Spirit to speak to you and you are obedient to that. It's also maybe it's financial dependency. Maybe you're now having to trust the Lord financially in a way that you never have had to. That's a sort of stretching that takes place, that pruning that takes place, when you're being refined in the fire, because God is getting ready to push you, propel you into the next season. He's got to make sure you got something to hold you, to sustain you for the next season, because he is not about to throw you in there
if you're not ready. If you didn't steward the little things that he gave you well.
Right. And I think that's the biggest point in all of it.
Just like Erica was saying, he's stretching and refining you and building your character. And another thing that's really important that we can see in Isaiah chapter 7 that stuck out to me was he listened. He listened to what God was saying, and he held on to that. And I think that's really important, because sometimes I think that it's hard to discern God's voice, or sometimes we don't feel like God is speaking. But the case may not be God's not speaking, because God is always speaking. It's, are we quiet enough to hear? Are we always asking, always talking, and always like running our mouth, but not quiet enough to hear? And are we able to discern his voice? So I know what my sister's voice sounds like. I know what my parents' voice sounds like, because I spend time with them. I know exactly what it sounds like when I hear them from afar and they call my name. But how do you discern someone's voice that you don't spend time with? So, in other words, are you spending time in the Word? Are you spending time in prayer with God? Because then that's when you're able to discern and hear from God. Like, I can discern pretty quickly now sometimes when I'm hearing from God and when I'm hearing from the enemy. It sounds, unfortunately, very similar, but I know the enemy is full of deception and lies, and that's what he will speak to me. And then I hear the voice of God, and it's nothing but goodness, hope, and promise. And he brings that to pass. So you have to know who God is. You have to spend time in the Word to understand whose voice am I hearing and whose voice am I going to follow. Another thing that I think happens too sometimes is, like I was saying before, it's not that we don't hear God's voice. It's that sometimes we may choose or pick the other voice, and that voice gets louder and louder, and God's voice gets quieter and quieter because we're choosing to pick the other voice. And so in that case, we just have to spend more time in the Word and hold on to God's promises and his faithfulness and really study who he is
Right.
in his promises.
And then I think to kind of just wrap it all up, for me, I'm going to just share like personally kind of like the things that I've been dealing with, especially because, we're speaking or we're telling you guys all this stuff, but I want to be really transparent and say, for me, it is literally the hardest thing for me in this season. And I know God, what he wants me to do is just be quiet and just sit and wait for him to speak. Mm-hmm. I did a fast, back in August because I was just feeling like just kind of feeling like reading the Bible was a chore and just feeling like it wasn't a relationship for me anymore. And I just needed something. I just knew something was missing. And I kind of knew what it was. And I felt like I needed a reset. And I was like, I need to do a fast. So I did a 3-day water fast. And it's amazing how being a little hungry will clear up everything. Like I could hear the Lord like roaring at me. I was like, wow, I could hear you. Now, I'm not telling you guys all to do a fast, but I'm just saying in the fast, my biggest revelation was that God wanted me to sit and wait and be quiet, meaning practicing like mindfulness and just like quieting my mind. And to this day, it is one of the hardest things for me to do is just to sit in complete silence,
no phone,
and not allow my mind to think, not allow my mind like to have thoughts, like races of thoughts. Because automatically I'm going to start going into, all right, it's easy for me to pray. Like I can go down a laundry list of like, God, I would like to see this. And I would like you to reveal this to me. And I want to pray for such and such. You know what, Lord? I also want to pray for the dying children.
I'm trying to talk to you, but you're talking so loud. You can't hear me.
I'm like, I would also like to pray for the children in Africa. And you know what? I just saw something happen in Europe and I really want to pray for them as well. Lord, I can pray. Like talk about unceasing prayer. I will pray. I'll be like, you know what, Lord, and that homeless man that I drove by on the freeway, Lord, I pray that you give him shelter. Like and God's like, shut up. Just sit and listen. I hear it, but I'm telling you can't hear from me because you're praying so much. I mean, the main thing is just getting to a place where we can just quiet our thoughts and hear from the Lord. So here's the thing. We want to start a challenge where we actually practice spending just a couple minutes a day waiting for the Lord to speak to us, just being quiet and just quieting everything down and not praying, not doing anything, just listening for the Lord's voice. So I want you guys to leave a comment below once you've practiced this. And if you've had an experience where God has actually spoken to you, you've heard something, revelation in some sort of way from the Lord, please leave it below. We hope this has been a great conversation for you guys. We will see you and you will hear from us